going to start, and once he starts it, I'll come back in so you can see. He's been going on, and the video game is set in ancient Greece.
Ancient Greece.
Ancient Greece. And so what he does is in this video, he is the character.
All right, Mason, I'm hoping you can't hear anything because I wasn't talking. And Caden, just looking at the map here, the entire map is Greece. So you can't even zoom out and see the whole thing. But this is the Peloponnese down here, the city of Sparta down here, Attica and the city of Athens up here. And then you get into the mountains of northern Greece up here, and the game also includes all the Greek islands. So the majority of the ancient Greek world is represented in this game on this map. So right now, my character is standing on Mount Taygetos, overlooking the city of Sparta down below. So I am right down here. Spartans. Yeah. Yep. Yep, Battle of 300 today. Sorry, my wife's chatting with me. So, but yeah, overlooking the city of Sparta down there. So we'll just give people a couple of minutes. I said we'd start at 1 o'clock, so give people a couple of minutes to sign on and get ready to go. All right, so we are going to get started here. Just a reminder, if you are in my class, there is an assignment for just write down 3 things that you learn about each spot that we visit, hoping to get through Sparta today and look at a couple of places within Sparta, and then also go to the Battle of Thermopylae and look at the Persian army and where the 300 Spartans bottled them up in northern Greece. And then if we have time, maybe get to Olympia and maybe even Delphi, and just look at some of the areas over there, and the Olympic Games and things like that, and the Oracle of Delphi as well. So we'll see how much time we have. I don't want to go much more than an hour. So yeah, write down three things from each spot that we visit and turn those in for your assignment. If you are with another ancient history teachers class, welcome and thank you for joining us. And there's just a few people on here right now. Hopefully some more join us. If you have questions, type them into the box. I'm going to be watching that as we go through. All right, so we're standing here on the slopes of Mount Taygetos. There's our bird, Icaros there. He's going to fly off. Now, according to legend, every Spartan born, every Spartan, and I'm dressed as a Spartan soldier here, every Spartan born was brought up to this mountain and inspected by the elders. Elder leaders in the Spartan community, and if the baby was deemed unhealthy for any reason, boy or girl, they were tossed off of this mountain to die as an infant. The Spartans were a military society. Their goal as a city was to build the best army in the world, and so only the healthiest boys and girls were allowed to live and stay alive. And so, according to legend, they were tossed off of the cliffside here. Now, archaeologists have actually done digs down at the bottom of these cliffs and down in these canyons and things. We'll jump down here without dying. And we have not actually found any human remains. There's been no bones that we found or dug up at any point in time, or very few. So we think that if this happened, it didn't happen very often, or it didn't happen at all. But we do know that Spartan children were left out on hillsides, exposed to die if they were deemed weak and unworthy of growing up to be a Spartan soldier, or to be a Spartan mother of future Spartan soldiers. So this is the chasm where the legends say that the Spartan babies were brought to be killed. So yeah, I don't know if that's a good idea, Mason. I'm not sure if there were people whose jobs it was to bring the corpses somewhere else, maybe bury them somewhere else, or dispose of them. That could be a possibility. It's not written about in the ancient records, so we're just not quite sure. And actually, that was what I was going to talk about. Spartan society is built off of two different classes. And so we have the true-born Spartans, who would be from the city of Sparta here. I'll activate my bird here. This is Icaros. And the city of Sparta over here. And actually, early on in its history, Sparta conquered the group of cities across the mountains here and enslaved those people. And because the people on the other side of the mountains, the Mysians, outnumbered the Spartans by so much, the Spartans were so scared of a slave revolt, that's why people think the Spartans developed this military society, was to make sure that the slaves who outnumbered the free Spartans in the city did not revolt, that they would be so scared of the might of the Spartan soldiers that they would be terrified to revolt. So the slaves did all of the jobs around Sparta. They worked all of the farmland you can see here. Sparta is famous in Greece for actually having some pretty flat farmland. Greece is mostly what you see up there, mostly mountains, but Sparta had some pretty good farmland around it, and the slaves worked that farmland and did all the things like the smithing and all the artistry and making of all the everyday household items and those kinds of things, so that Spartan men could focus solely on being a soldier and being the best warriors in the world. Okay, so we're going to head down to the city of Sparta here, and we're going to look at the agoge, the upbringing. So if Spartan kids were deemed worthy to survive and live, they were taken away from their mothers at age 7 and put into a special Spartan military school down in the city here. So we're going to head down and take a look at that. So again, if you have questions or comments, type them into the chat. I'm kind of watching the chat. Don't spam the chat, but if you guys are just kind of talking back and forth, that's cool too. But try not to spam the chat. Hey Joel, good to see you. Just try not to spam the chat because then I can't keep up. If people ask a question, it'll go by too quick and I won't be able to see it. So we're just loading into Sparta here. I thought this would be quicker than running down to the city, but maybe not. So here we are. We're going to go talk to Leonidas.
Welcome, visitor, to where Spartan boys become Spartan men.
All right, so Leonidas, this is the king of Sparta. During the Battle of Thermopylae, Sparta actually had 2 kings. They always have 2 kings at a time. One king is the one who stays behind and manages the city and is there in case the other king is killed in battle, because the other king would be the general, and then they would trade off. The one king would lead the troops out into battle, and then the other king would stay back behind. So kind of like we talked about in the fall with the Roman consuls, where there's 2 presidents for the year. The Spartans had the same the same idea. Actually, they had it before the Romans, to have 2 kings at a time. So this is Leonidas that we're talking to. He's going to kind of lead us on our tour, and he is the most famous Spartan king because he is the one who sacrificed himself at the Battle of Thermopylae with the other 300 Spartans.
The agoge was Sparta's strict education system. This strenuous regimen took in the young boys and then reshaped them until nothing was left but the strength, intelligence, and resolve of a perfect Spartan citizen. I will find you once your visit has ended, and we will talk further. Until then, visitor.
Yeah, Eliza, we're going to see it wasn't a school like we would consider it, where it's all self-contained in one building. The whole community, the whole city is built around training and educating these Spartan boys from the age of 7 up until the age of 60, when they can retire from the army. The whole city is built around these Spartan soldiers and trying to
Sparta was a Greek
make them
city
educated.
located in the Peloponnese. It differed from other cities of the time in that it had no walls. Sparta originated as 4 neighboring villages: Patane, Limnes, Mizoa, and Cynosura, all of which shared the same political, military, and religious life. After 2 wars with the Messenians, the city's territory expanded even further. By the 5th century BCE, they allegedly controlled almost half of the Peloponnese.
Okay, and we can see this picture here taken present day. This is the plain of Sparta and the mountains back behind, Mount Taygetos up above, covered in snow there. So that's what it actually looks like in the real world. And you can see the game has tried to recreate that as we're standing kind of down in the middle of that plain that was in that picture. So pretty cool.
The agoge was the military training and education program undergone by Sparta's male youth. Grooming men for war was one of the city's main priorities. Boys began their training at the young age of 7 and completed it when they were 30. It has been said that Spartan infants were inspected for weakness shortly after birth. If they were deemed too sickly, they were thrown into chasms. However, this information remains unproven. The healthy boys were considered suitable for training. When they came of age, they were removed from their families and were placed into service of the state. Their education included subjects like reading, writing, and even music. but was mostly focused on tough military exercises meant to turn the boys into efficient soldiers. The agoge was divided into 3 cycles. One for boys aged 7 to 12, one for adolescents aged 12 to 20, and one for men aged 20 to 30. Each cycle included different exercises for refining the body and mind.
So yeah, so you can see the training area here. We've got bows and arrows. We've got swords. We've got areas for sharpening swords and spears. You know, this would be maybe a more of a classroom area. You could sit in the shade here, but also weapon supplies and things under the cover here where everybody's working to become the best soldiers in the world. Yeah, so Joel, this is the first location. This is the Agoge, the Spartan school that we're looking at, the training school for young Spartans. The training was brutal. I'm not sure how many of you guys watched the video, the last stand of the 300 that I posted in the classroom. It wasn't an assignment, but I posted in the classroom, but it talked about some of the brutal training methods and things. One thing they did was they would line 2 boys up and they would whip them at the same time. And the first one to pass out loses. And their families would come and scream at the boys, don't pass out, don't pass out. You'll bring dishonor to the family if you pass out. So there's a Spartan soldier, looks like he's training. The idea was to create the toughest soldiers in the world. So yeah, it's definitely harsh, but it was part of the deal if you were a Spartan. Loading, 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 loading.
Sparta played a large role in defeating the Persians during the Greco-Persian Wars in the 5th century BCE. They held their king Leonidas' glorious death at the Battle of Thermopylae in particularly high esteem. Because Leonidas was killed in battle, Sparta believed he died a good death and showed incredible bravery, qualities to be held as a model for all Spartans. This idealized bravery was embedded in the city's collective memory and was the main quality people strove for in the agoge.
So one of the things about, and here's another statue to Leonidas, one of the things about the Spartans is the only way to get a burial if you with your name on your tombstone is to be killed in battle. And so for the Spartans, this is the ultimate thing that could happen to them. The best thing that could happen to them would be to die in battle if you're a Spartan. Spartan women could also receive the same honor if they died in childbirth. They could be buried in a tomb with their gravestone marked with their name. Otherwise, you're just an anonymous Spartan who died ungloriously. So here we can see Spartan children training, even the girls training. Girls got to train, it was believed. Healthy girls became healthy mothers who made healthy Spartan soldiers.
The first cycle of the agoge focused on boys aged 7 to 12. Each of the boys had shaved heads and wore light clothing. They walked everywhere barefoot, swam the Eurotas River all year long, slept on reeds, and participated in cult rituals for Artemis or Thea. The boys were grouped into herds, or agoli, and were supervised by older adolescents. Once they reached the age of 12, they entered the second cycle of the agoge, which aimed to integrate them into the society of citizen soldiers.
So, like it talked about, one of the things that Spartan boys were expected to do is they would just drop them in the wild. With, naked and like the show Naked and Afraid or whatever, where they just dropped in the wild. The Spartan boys were just dropped in the wild, and they had a cloak and they had to survive for a couple of days. They were taught to steal because when you're out on campaign, you need to find food. You got to do what you got to do to steal and survive. So it's a very harsh upbringing, harsh training. Yeah, the river could get cold. Eliza, I mean, there's snow up on top of the mountains in the wintertime. It's not quite as harsh as our winters, but it's gonna be very, very, very cold to be out in the rivers. So it's kind of a mark of toughness, and so the Spartans were always trying to out tough each other. So here's just some areas for wrestling, for training, and track. You know, you could run, do some running events in these areas here. Oh, looks like this guy sprained his ankle or something. He's hurt. Uh-oh. Go throw him off the mountain, I guess. Didn't make it. But then at around age 12 is when they started training them with weapons. The boys would get to train with weapons. Ooh, I didn't see the kids in the
The Agoge's
background.
second
I'll go
cycle
back and look.
included boys aged 12 to 20. When they reached the age of 20, the young men were dubbed Erinyes and could officially serve as hoplites in the Spartan army. Until the age of 30, Spartan men lived in communal mess halls called Saskenia. From the age of 22 onward, they were permitted to start a family, but 30 was viewed as a more appropriate age to get married. Spartan men served in the military until they turned 60, when they were designated as elders, or gerontes. However, many were known to continue serving anyway, such as King Archimedes III, who fought in the army until he was killed in battle at the age of 62.
So pretty crazy, a lifelong thing. Here we've got some Spartan soldiers inspecting the troops here. I'm not sure which kids you were talking about, Eliza. These guys are kind of wrestling. These girls look like they're kind of warming up here, ready to race. These guys have a ball. Might just be playing catch or some kind of game. Yeah, I'm not sure. Yeah, Kate, the normal version is going to be a little bit different just because, you know, you have weapons and can be assassinated and those kinds of things. So this one's a little bit different than that. So let's go to where they eat.
All adult male Spartans participated in communal meals called syssitia. The attending Spartans contributed different kinds of food on a monthly basis, in addition to a small sum of money to pay for meat. Each man was entitled to one portion of a meal, with the exception of the kings, who received 2 portions. Syssitia attendance was mandatory for every Spartan fortunate enough to be part of the group. The meals had great political significance. According to Xenophon and Plutarch, the syssitia was designed to foster a sense of equality between citizens. It also demonstrated the self-restraint and moderation of Spartan society. But in reality, the syssitia only increased the differentiation between the rich and the poor. Those who could not afford to contribute to the communal food not only missed their meals, but also lost their right of citizenship.
So yeah, so you'd come in here, bring your offering, everybody would share in the food. But like they said, if you couldn't afford to do that, you would lose your right of citizenship here. So we're going to skip our quiz with Leonidas just to avoid that. Gonna run, oops, sorry guys. Gonna run into that tripod. Just kind of across the city here. This is the main kind of entryway here. We've got these monuments up here to the 300 soldiers who died in the Battle of Thermopylae. That was a big event in Sparta. I want to show you where the Spartan kings, the throne room down here, which is just over here. Nope. Sorry. So the throne room here, right in here. So we've got 2 thrones for 2 kings. So in the game, both of these kings are in here, and you kind of have to figure out one of them's a good guy and one of them's a bad guy, and they're both kind of blaming each other. So you got to kind of figure out which one is the one you should ally with, and which one's the enemy, which one's going to help you out in your quest to restore your family. So this would be the throne room in Sparta. So you can see the lambda, which is that almost a triangle, that kind of upside down point up there. That's a Greek L. The Spartans was the biggest city in Laconia, was the name of the land that we're in. And so they had that on their shields and on their banners and those kinds of things. So you see that lambda Greek L letter everywhere else. And then just, we won't take the full tour, but just a quick trip through the marketplace here. This is all slaves making all of this stuff and having it for the Spartan soldiers in these areas. So the Spartans did not do any craft work or anything like that. This was all just soldiers. Oops, I'm sitting on the bench, falling down. This was all for soldiers, and then they could come in and buy what they needed here in the marketplace in these areas. Okay. All right. So we can see where the council of elders met in that building over there. All right. No, you can't hit the king in this game. You could in the regular version, but not in the Discovery Tour. All right, so we're going to head up to Thermopylae. So we're going to fast travel here, and this is the most famous battle for the Spartans in their history. Yeah, Joel, so we're going to our second location here, the Battle of Thermopylae, up here in the northern area. So what happens here is, like we talked about on Tuesday, the Athenians win a battle against the Persian Empire. The Athenians help the Greek city-states in Asia Minor, in what we would call Turkey. They help them revolt against the Persian Empire, which is huge. It stretches all the way from Turkey all the way to India. And the Persian capital is in what we would call Iran today, in present-day Iran. And it's not quite on the map, Turkey, but it would be just off the map over here. So in 490 BC, the Persians sailed across, landed at the beach of Marathon, and the Athenians kicked their butts and sent them back into their ships, and there was chaos, and the Persian army was slaughtered. They lost 6,000 troops. The Athenians lost less than 200, and the Persians just kind of went back and went away. 10 years later, there's a new great king of Persia, and he is trying to avenge and get revenge against the Athenians who destroyed his father's army. And so what he does is he says, well, I'm going to send ships here, but I'm also just going to bring troops here. And so what he does is he brings troops all the way around here, and they come down through land here and into Greece here. And so the Greek cities down in this area have to decide, are they going to stay separate? These are all separate city-states. You know, you've got the city of Thebes up here, and the city of Delphi here, and the city of Megara, the city of Corinth, the city of Argos, the city of Sparta, the city of Olympia. You know, what are all these cities, the city of Athens, are all these cities going to fight separately, or are they all going to work together to defeat this huge Persian army that's coming in? And so what they decide to do is band together. And so the Spartans, the best land army in the world, we've seen their soldiers and their training, they're voted to lead this battle against the Persians. So we're going to see what that looks like here as the Persians come down. So let's talk to Leonidas again.
Welcome, visitor, to Thermopylae. Thermopylae was where a courageous group of Spartans stood amongst other Greek soldiers and held off the forces of King Xerxes, the Persian. When you're done, find me and we'll speak more.
Joel, can we make sure we're not spamming the chat, just so I can see the questions and things? If you want to chat with your friends and stuff in here, that's fine, but I want to make sure that I can see questions as they go by. All right, so I just ran by. This is the statue to Leonidas that was built after. Okay, Leo, of course, lion. So the statue is in lion form for Leonidas.
The Persian king Darius's cries of rage echoed for years after his humiliating defeat at Marathon. Even after Darius's death, his son Xerxes continued to seek vengeance against the Greeks. According to Aeschylus, Asia was emptied of all its men. Greek spies brought the news of Xerxes' imminent invasion back to their homeland. Afterwards, many discussions were had on the best place to mount a defense. In the end, the Greeks decided on Thermopylae. The area featured a narrow pass that could act as a bottleneck for the Persian army, negating their numerical superiority. It also offered naval advantages, offering the Greek fleets opportunities for flanking. 5,000 Peloponnesian Greeks set up at a fort near the entrance of the narrow passage, otherwise known as the Hot Gates. Leading them was Leonidas, a Spartan king who prided himself on supposedly being a direct descendant of Heracles. Leonidas was accompanied by several elite soldiers who together made up the famous 300 Spartans.
So I'm not sure, Mason, what you're asking on Nanny. So the idea here is that the Greeks are going to force the Persians into this narrow area. The Persian army's huge, but if you force them into a narrow area, you can only fight so many at a time. And this is a perfect spot because the mountains are really tall, cliffs on the other side. There's really no good way to come down through along the Greek coast. You hit these mountains, and to bring an army over these mountains anywhere is really tough. And so if you're marching an army, the best way to do it is along the coast. And there's an old road here, an ancient road that was well used along the coast here, but it got really narrow between these cliffs at the pass of Thermopylae here that we're about to go through. So we can see they're going to narrow the front so that they can attack the Persians better.
The Persian army arrived in the summer of 480 BCE, preceded by a flood of rumors regarding their strength and numbers. It was claimed they consumed 6,000 tons of wheat every day, and that they dried every river and brook they passed to quench their near insatiable thirst. During their march to Thermopylae, the Persians faced no opposition, and in fact, increased their numbers further by recruiting more soldiers from other Greek cities and places like Thrace. According to Herodotus, the last count of the Persian fleet was numbered at 1,207 boats, mounted by approximately 240,000 men. He estimates the land army, meanwhile, was made up of more than 1 million men. The Greek forces at Thermopylae were heavily outnumbered.
So we're not quite sure how many troops the Persians had. Even to this day, the numbers have been so inflated. But I guess the best comparison I can think of is if we read on the internet this morning that the Chinese landed like 10 million troops on the coast of Washington. And they were marching towards Seattle, and then we're going to come to the Tri-Cities, Yakima, the Tri-Cities, and take over. And how scared would we all be? We're far away, but we're far enough away from the coast that they're not right here. But we know that there are 10 million Chinese soldiers, in an army headed our way. And so the Greeks were facing a very similar thing as this Persian army was coming down. And so 10 million, do they really have 10 million? Do they have 20 million? Do they have 5 million? Everybody starts to get scared. And so we start to see a lot of that fear come up. But the Greeks were definitely heavily, heavily outnumbered. We know that for sure.
Xerxes believed that at the sight of his massive army, the Greeks at Thermopylae would flee in terror. Instead, they deliberated. The majority of the Peloponnesians wanted to engage the Persians on the Isthmus of Corinth. Leonidas, meanwhile, believed it was wiser to stay put in Thermopylae. While the Greek forces debated, a Persian horseman was sent to spy on the enemy. He returned to Xerxes with surprising news. Not only were the Greeks not fleeing, but the Spartans guarding the fort were exercising and combing their hair. A far cry from the fearful soldiers Xerxes expected. To increase the pressure on the Greeks, Xerxes waited 4 more days, then attacked on the 5th. The Persians faced heavy resistance and suffered many losses, and Herodotus says Xerxes leaped 3 times from his chair, seized with fear for his army. The following day proved to be just as difficult for the Persian forces, and the Greeks continued to stand their ground.
So the first 2 days, and this is why Thermopylae is called the hot gates, therm, right, meaning heat in Greek, like thermometer, which is something that measures the heat. So there's actually natural hot springs here. So when it wasn't being used as a battlefield in Greek history, this was actually a vacation spot for Greeks. They could come and bathe in the hot springs. So we'll sit and bathe for a second here in the hot springs. Okay, so first 2 days of battle, the Spartans are doing really, really well. They've got the Persians pretty well bottled up in the narrow pass, and the Persians are losing lots of troops, and the Persian king is getting very anxious.
To be held at Thermopylae indefinitely, until an inhabitant from the region came forward with information. He told the Persians of another route, which could take them around Thermopylae. A Persian contingent was sent to verify the information. While there were Greek soldiers stationed to guard the route, they were forced to flee from the Persians. Thus, on the 3rd day of the battle, the Greeks were surrounded by their enemy.
So the Persians found a scout, a Greek trader, who told them about a way around, and they were able to sneak troops around and get behind the Greek army and the Spartans, and that's what led to the loss of the Spartans.
With the Persians both in front of and behind them, the Greek forces at Thermopylae realized they had 2 choices: flee to live another day, or stand and fight till their last breath. Most of the Greeks chose the former option, but some stayed, including Leonidas and his 300 Spartans. For the Spartans, dying a glorious death was one of the highest honors they could achieve. The few members of Leonidas' Spartans who did not participate in the last stand at Thermopylae felt that they had missed an opportunity for honor and either committed suicide or continued living under the mockery and disgust of their fellow citizens. The Spartans' last stand was not only for glory, though. Had they not held off the Persians, the Greeks' retreating forces would probably have been cut down by enemy horsemen.
Yeah, so the Greeks had 5,000 troops here, and what they decided to do once they realized that the Persians had found that secret way around the mountain here. I'm not sure if the game shows that, but there's a path in real life that kind of goes up and around over this hill behind this mountain right here, actually, and then around and then back to behind where the Greeks were camped in. So you can see how the pass gets really, really narrow in this area, and then that trail would come in. There you can see it coming in back here, and there's the fort that the Greeks were in. And so they were able to come up here. Well, if you have that happen, and you have your army is in this little narrow spot, you're going to be surrounded by the Persians on both sides, and you're going to get crushed pretty good by the Persians. So what they did was they said, well, let's only have some of us get crushed, and they were able to get most of the army away and down that road and back south. And what they were doing was actually there were only 5,000 troops up here. Most of the combined Greek army, including the Athenians and the other cities that joined in with the Spartans and Athens, were actually down here in Corinth. And see, this is another narrow area that they knew the Persians would have to come through. And so they were down here in Corinth waiting for the Persian army to get to this point. But if the whole army's down here, Athens is going to get destroyed if they lose this battle. So Athens is going to get destroyed. The Greek army hurries back, and they regroup with the rest of the Greek army back here. And the Spartans stay behind to hold up the Persian army long enough so that the rest of their main army can escape and get back to join up with the Greek army. So we're going to just walk through this pass. I think does this next one show the death of Leonidas? I think it does.
On the morning of the third day, King Xerxes was assured of his victory. However, that victory did not come easy. King Leonidas himself fell in battle, and a furious fight broke out around his body. The Spartans fought to the last man, and when they had all been slain, Leonidas's body was brought before Xerxes. According to Herodotus, Persians usually honored the most courageous warriors, even if they were enemies. However, Xerxes was so consumed by rage at the Spartans' resistance that instead he cut off Leonidas's head and ordered it impaled on a stake. A statue of a lion was later erected on the hill of the Spartans' last stand in honor of Leonidas's bravery.
So you can see, we'll skip this next part of the tour here so we can move along. But this is where it starts to get really narrow, and you can imagine the big Persian army having to come up here. And it doesn't matter how many soldiers you have. And here's King Leonidas here. It doesn't matter how many soldiers you have coming up in this area. You can't get through here. It's just a steep drop off to a cliff there. There's no way around there for an army to go. Maybe one or two, but not an army. And nothing this way. So the army has to come through here. And so what you're able to do is, if you're Spartan soldiers like our character here, we can stand here next to a guy here, next to a guy here, next to a guy here, all the way across. And only, 10, 12, 14, 15 guys can hold the entrance to this narrow pass up here. And the rest of the Spartans can stand behind and hold those guys up. And the Greeks were heavily armored. They had heavy helmets on that were hard to get through. They had metal chest guards, metal arm guards, metal leg pieces, and then the big, huge Captain America-sized shields to kind of cover their body, and long spears to stab. And so you could stand here with your shield up and your spear and just kind of stab away as the Persians, who were not nearly as heavily armed, would come up. And the Persians were basically armed with like wicker shields, like we would think of wicker as like just kind of that woven netting type thing that is in the backyard furniture and stuff like that. And so the Persians would come up, and they were very lightly armored, no metal armor at all, maybe just some leather armor or just cloth even. And because in Asia you want to move fast because there's lots of land and big open space. But here the Greeks were able to, just with a few guys, keep this area narrow and big heavy shields, and then working together they could just stab and stab and stab and stab with their spears, and the Persians would basically just, the bodies would pile up here. The Persians would have to come up, grab bodies, drag them off so that they could get more troops up here, and the Greeks could rest while they did that. And the Greeks hardly lost any people at all. So that works really well until you're surrounded. And when the Greeks were surrounded, they realized that this wasn't going to work anymore, so they left. Eventually, Leonidas and his crew got surrounded. They had troops coming in from both sides, and your shield wall falls apart, and then you're just fighting hand to hand, and it gets kind of crazy. So they were all died there. But of course, that sacrifice is very famously commemorated throughout history and becomes a big part of our legends and myths in history and why why we are the way we are and basically that sacrifice rallied the rest of the Greek cities around the Spartans and the Athenians and brought the whole continent of Greece together and saved democracy in a lot of ways. And so even though the Spartans hated democracy, they died in a way to save it, and without really knowing that's what they were doing, and so we have that legacy of democracy coming to us now. All right, so we're gonna head to. Do you guys want to go to the Oracle, or do you want to go to Olympia and see the Olympic area? Just type in Oracle or Olympia real quick. Leighton votes Oracle. Olympia. Eliza votes no. Olympia. Looks like Olympia wins. Hopefully we'll have time for the Oracle here. So let's fast travel here to Olympia. Leighton, we might have time. We might still have time. So the Olympic Games were canceled this year for the first time. They've been held every 4 years except for, I believe, World War II was the only other time the Olympic Games were canceled. But because of the COVID-19, they were canceled. They're supposed to be in Tokyo this summer. They've been moved to next summer. But the idea of an Olympiad every 4 years, that comes from the ancient Greeks and the Olympic Games that were held every 4 years. Now, the summers in between the ancient Olympic Games, there were other big game-type festivals held in different cities. Corinth had their own Olympic-style games. Delphi, where the Oracle is, we'll maybe go up and see that. They had another Olympic-style games. And so there were different cities around that had Olympic Games, but the Olympics were the biggest ones in the ancient Greek world. And the Olympics were held in this city of Olympia, which is on the Peloponnese, the southern part of Greece here. It's just north of Sparta down here. In the city of Olympia, it's not on the coast. It's actually in a valley between the mountains here is where the games were held. And the Olympic Games were a religious festival. They were a festival to honor Zeus. And so this huge temple here is the temple to Zeus the Olympian. Of course, Zeus is the king of the gods on Mount Olympus. And so Zeus the Olympian was a major religious festival in Greece. And so this temple was one of the most famous temples in the world, in the ancient world. And it's the most famous because of this statue, which was said to be gold in ancient times. This statue, which the Greeks would have believed was not just a statue, but was actually Zeus, or a representation of Zeus that Zeus could inhabit when he wanted to. And so this statue has been melted down. Since then, the temple was destroyed. The Christians, once they took over the Roman Empire, did not want to worship Zeus anymore, and so they destroyed a lot of these places, especially these sacred places. They canceled the Olympic Games and went in and took all the gold and things and turned it into their own treasures and their own things. But every year, all of the cities from every 4 years, all of the cities from ancient Greece would come, and they would have to make an offering in order to get their athletes into the games. They would make an offering to the temple of Zeus. So this was one of the richest temples, and so the priests here would be among the richest people in the Greek world because they were able to run this temple, and every 4 years the Greeks would come in and just bring all kinds of treasure and offerings and things to Zeus here. But of course, the main attraction was the Olympic Games. So we're going to head over to. Let me get my bearings here. So we're going to head over to the Olympic Stadium here. Now, one thing about the Olympic Games, women and girls were not allowed to come to the Olympics and watch. And one of the reasons they were not allowed to come and watch is the athletes participated naked in just about every event. So here is the stadium, and we can see there's a race. It's like a training race going on. We've got runners running around. Right here. Good job, guys. Way to work. Now, the game decided not to depict the athletes as being nude, but if we were in ancient Greece, those loincloths would not be there. All of these athletes would be training and practicing and competing completely in the nude. This area was also used for chariot races, which was one of the events they didn't compete in the nude. But you rode in a chariot here, pulled by usually 2 horses, and you would race around the track in this area as well. Yeah, Eliza, the games were for Zeus. So the games are a religious festival, a religious celebration. So like we have Easter holiday to honor the if you're Christian, to honor the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. The Greeks had the festival of Zeus at Olympia, which became the games to honor Zeus, the god of Mount Olympus. And so that's what we have here. So the track events were over here. The racing events would have been at this stadium. If we run across the fields here, there's another stadium. This would have been for some of the other events. We can see we have chairs set up here for judges to watch. We've got bleachers up here for people to watch. And this is wrestling. Would have taken place here. So different wrestling events. Again, the loincloths are put into the game, but if this was true, this would not be going on, or would be going on naked with all the athletes here. And then pankration is another Greek sport. This is kind of like boxing. You can see these guys training here, stretching out, lifting weights. Right here. And pankration was like Greek boxing in this area. So here's an area that would have been used to start if they did running competitions here for shorter runs. And you would have to start behind the sticks, and then they would pull a rope on the side on one of the sides here. They'd pull a rope that's kind of runs underneath. Yep, right there. There's the rope. And then all of the gates would open. And so as soon as your gate opened, then you could start. That way they could keep people from having false starts and those kinds of things. So we have the Olympic Games. That's a really good idea. Good question, Eliza. In 1896, a guy decided that we should have these Olympic Games as just a festival of sports and friendly competition between countries. One of the things that the ancient Greeks did was they declared a peace treaty every 4 years during the Olympics. So no warfare could happen between any of the city-states that were competing at the Olympics. And so if you were going to send athletes to the Olympics, and you wanted to, because if they won, they became famous and brought glory to your city, they would represent your city well, and so you wanted to send athletes. So they declared a peace treaty, and so the peace of Olympia was there and happened. And so this idea about in the late 1890s, 1896 was the first modern Olympics, was to bring other countries together. So all the countries would send their athletes to one place. And the first place they held the modern Olympics was in 1896 was Athens, in Greece. And then in 2004, right before most of you guys were born, they held them there again. Was the second time the modern Olympic Games have been in Greece. But the idea is to bring everybody together, to bring the world's population together, to give people a positive place to go and compete for the glory of their country, and stop all wars and those kinds of things during the Olympics. Now, we don't always stop all the wars, and we don't always get along with everybody. For instance, the Russians boycotted the Olympics in 1984 because they were held in the United States. We boycotted the Olympics. We didn't send any athletes to the Olympics in 1980 because they were held in Russia. They were held in Moscow. There's all kinds of political things have sort of gotten in the way of the Olympics in modern times. But 1936, the Olympic Games were held in Germany and Berlin, and Hitler used it as a showcase to kind of show off the German supremacy. Very famously, his fast runners were beat by the American black runners, Jesse Owens, and was the most famous one, who kind of showed up Hitler and this idea that the German race was superior to all other races, and they lost that foot race to the Americans and to Jesse Owens, a black American who was the fastest person in the world at that point. So, all of these political events have happened around the Olympics, and the ancient Olympics were set up that way very, very similarly for these reasons, to kind of promote, everybody coming together to compete and have positive interactions with people from other cities and those kinds of things. So, these were huge events, well attended. The bleachers up here, you can see, lots of space for lots of people to watch and crowd in and see all these events. So not nearly as many events as we have today. So I was hoping this year would be an Olympic year, but we'll have to wait till next summer, 2021. So I love the Summer Olympics. So, all right, we've got just a couple more minutes. Let's move up to Delphi real quick. This is like one of my top bucket list places here to go to in the real world. I'd love to get up to Delphi. It's up in the mountains in Greece. I've been to Greece, but didn't make it to Delphi. But I know, Eliza, you didn't have to pay to get in, other than your city had to make an offering to Zeus, and so they had to make a donation to the Temple of Zeus for the city to get in. But if you were just traveling to watch, I believe it was free, kind of first come, first serve basis for the people who were there to watch. So the Oracle of Delphi, this is the Oracle of Apollo, the god Apollo, and his oracle was called the Pythia, and this was a priestess who would go into a trance, and when asked a question, would tell your future. So this is Greek fortune telling, and they had to. The Greeks could come and ask questions, and so most people would come and ask, basic daily life questions. Who should I marry? My brother-in-law is starting a business and wants me to invest. Should I spend the money on that? What do I do for that? These types of regular everyday questions. This man proposed to me, but my father wants me to marry this man, and who do I marry? And all those kinds of things. The oracle was believed to be able to see the future, that the god Apollo spoke to the oracle, and that the oracle could see the future. And so we see people lined up here, forming a line to go into the oracle, and they would be asked to make an offering here, an offering to Apollo. They could leave stuff here. The priests here would set the offerings up on this altar You can see the knife there. If they brought a live animal to offer, the animal would be killed there, and then the meat could be taken. The bad parts of the the unedible parts would be burned in a sacred fire, and then the good parts could be taken. So if you had a chicken, you could still eat the chicken. You just would burn the bad parts. So we got soldiers guarding here. If we go into, oh man, these guys, there's a lot of soldiers around. If we go into the oracle here, we can see this statue to Apollo. Up here, Apollo surrounded by the snake, the python, and so the oracle was called the Pythia, who was the voice of the sacred serpent here. So we can see the oracle right here, and you could ask her any question you wanted, and usually her response was kind of like a fortune cookie. It was a riddle, a response of a riddle. And so, for instance, when the Athenian leaders came in to ask, what do we do about the Persians? The Persian army is coming down, to attack us. And the oracle said, hide behind your wooden wall. And so, yeah, we're not quite over an hour, Remington, but I started at 1, so it's not quite 2, but we're going to finish up here pretty shortly. The oracle said, to hide behind your wooden wall. You'll find protection behind your wooden wall. And the Greeks were like, well, we have a stone wall. Why would we want a wooden wall? In addition to the stone wall, do we need to build a wooden wall? Like, what do we do? And one of the Greek leaders, Themistocles, said, or the Athenian leaders, Themistocles, said, no. The wooden wall means our ships. It means our navy. And so what we should do is actually abandon the city of Athens. So based on the oracle's advice, so they sent people all the way up here to Delphi from Athens, and based on the oracle's advice, the whole city of Athens left and went to this island, the island of Salamis, and was protected by the Athenian fleet, which was the wooden ships. And so they hid behind their wooden wall. And the Athenian fleet actually tricked the Persians into coming into this narrow area. Sound familiar? Got the Persians to come into a narrow area, and the Athenian fleet was able to smash the Persian fleet, and the wooden wall of the Athenian navy defeated the Persian army. And so the oracle's prophecy turned out to be true in this case. And so the Greeks were huge believers in these oracles. They would come and ask the oracle lots of things, anything from kings and leaders of cities, big questions about war and peace, to just regular people, asking which crop should I plant this year, who should I marry, some of these basic questions. But it was quite a journey to get to Delphi. This is a small. That's right. This is a small town that is way up in the mountains. You've got to take this long winding road to get up here into the mountains, and it's shrunk down for the game's purposes, but it even takes a while in the game to kind of get across this area and get up to the sanctuary of Apollo at Delphi, which is this area up here. So, and they did have their own Olympic games up here where people would come up every 4 years, different years than the Olympics. Plays, you can see their theater over here. They'd have plays, different things, and then this area over here could be used for games and sports and things like that. So they have areas for that, but they were most famous for the oracle at Delphi. Okay. All right. Thank you guys so much for coming. So we had 4 spots we went to today. We started off in Sparta. I'm impressed that we got through all 4. We started off in Sparta down here. Then our next spot we went to was to Thermopylae up here. And then we went to Olympia here. And then we went to Delphi here. So if you have 3 things from each of those spots, that'd be 12 total things. You can send that in to me on the onto the Google Classroom, and we'll have a new assignment for you guys next week. All right. Thanks for coming, all of you guys who participated. Really appreciate it. And goodbye, and have a fantastic afternoon and the rest of your weekend.